So a couple of years ago, there was another story about another gang leader, and this guy, Lord Gino, one of the founders of the Latin Kings, who was trying to get early release, and it didn't happen. Just like Hoover and Ford, they're not releasing really too many of these gang leaders. They did release some of the GD, like higher ranking guys under the Trump administration, but they were not like the top guys. The top guys, I haven't seen too many of those guys get out. But anyways, this is about Lord Gino's case from all the way back in the day, and I'm going to cover this just like I covered the case with Big Law. And this happened on the north side of Chicago. Lord Gino is one of those guys. I may make a separate video on this about guys who a lot of people think are from like the south or the west side who are actually from up north. There's a pretty long list of guys like that. But anyways, this was over on Levitt and Potomac. And now that area, it's interesting, that area is like actually kind of upscale. There's like a lot of younger urban professional, wealthy people that have moved into that neighborhood. It's one of those neighborhoods that's been heavily gentrified. But anyways, so this is the case that Lord Gino was involved in. So Glenn Burr, they said, was a black youth. He was with his sister. He was with his cousin. His cousin's name was Nathaniel. His sister's name was Teresa. And he was with two friends. Now, one of the friends' name was Verlinda, and the other's was named Phyllis. And they were walking down the street. They had left the house that I think it was Glenn's house. I don't know that for a fact, but I think it was Glenn's house. He had lived over on Levitt. Now, this took place in June of 1971, and it was about 9:55 p.m. So when he got to the corner of Levitt and Potomac, Gustavo Colon, who was one of the founders of the Latin King street gang, who was armed with a gun, and his friend, he had a friend with him named Florentine Menendez. They approached the group. Menendez pointed at Glenn Burr and said, quote, "Shoot that black MF." Glenn attempted to flee, but according to the court documents, Gino Colon, Lord Gino, shot him and discharged 3 more bullets into him after he fell to the ground. Lord Gino, okay, now check this out, man. Lord Gino, the founder of the Latin Kings, then went up to Verlinda, put the gun to her head, smiled, and pulled the trigger, but the gun did not fire. So a jury found Lord Gino guilty of murder to serve a term of 30 to 60 years in prison. So in his appeal, he was seeking reversal and remandment of his conviction based on several asserted deprivations of his rights. Okay, he said that he had been deprived of a right to a fair trial based on admission into evidence of prejudicial hearsay testimony, foreclosure of defense attempts to impeach a key state witness, and consideration of incompetent evidence in aggravation, which resulted in the imposition of an excessively harsh sentence and ineffective representation by his counsel. So for people who don't understand all the legalese of what's going on here, in his appeal, he was just saying that some of the evidence was bogus. Okay, so at the trial, there were 3 eyewitnesses. They explained why they did not identify the slayer or give his description to the police at the hospital. Teresa, Glenn's sister, stated that she was hysterical on the night of the murder and could not talk to anybody. Verlinda had seen Gino Colon 11 or 12 times before the slaying and recognized him, but she said that she had assumed that Nathaniel Burr would provide the information to the police, so she didn't do it. Nathaniel Burr said that he spoke to police at the hospital, but was not asked for a description at that time and gave none. He returned home and told his mother that he knew who had done the shooting, but feared reprisals if he talked. The police came to his home within a few hours and persuaded that he had nothing to fear. He told them who had done the shooting and then selected pictures of Colon and Menendez from among at least 50 photographs. So Phyllis, who had given a description to the police at the hospital, said that a few days later they brought a number of pictures to her for her to view them, and she selected Colon and identified him as the gunman. So the investigator on the case was a guy named James Acosta. He was CPD. He corroborated the testimony of the 4 occurrence witnesses relating to the time and circumstances of their identifications. So he said that Nathaniel Burr, when he reached his home, had named Colon and Menendez, known to him by their nicknames Hercules and Brillo. So Gino's nickname at that time, apparently on the streets, was Hercules. The other guy was named as Brillo. And they were members of the Latin Kings gang, and as persons who had accosted his cousin. He described them and pointed out their photographs. So the cop, one of the cops over there, was a guy named Robert Kaiser. He testified that he knew Colon and Menendez, and that on the day of the murder, he had seen both men in the area of the shooting. He participated in the arrest of Colon, which took place on August 20th, 1971. It was stipulated that Menendez had died before the trial. Colon testified that he spent June 27th at his mother's home working on a neighbor's automobile and then joined in a celebration to honor his brother Jose, who had just returned from the army. Several persons testified in support of his alibi. Okay, so one of the guys was a neighbor named Angel Jimenez. He said that Colon had worked on his auto's transmission until 9:45 p.m. Jimenez said that he went to the party and that he saw Jose Colon and 20 other persons there. A woman named Barbara, who was a friend of Lord Gino, said that he was not out of her sight on June 27th from 5 p.m. until she left the party at 11 p.m. She believed he stopped working on the car at 8:30. A guy named Daniel did not attend the party but drove to the Cologne home to pick up his wife, and he believed that the party was held on Saturday, June 26th, not on Sunday, the 27th. A woman named Carmen, who's Gino's sister-in-law, testified that she attended the party on June 27th. She recalled that only 5 or 6 persons were present. So Jose Colon testified for the state in rebuttal, and his testimony indicated that he was not at his mother's home in Chicago on June 27, 1971, or on any other day in the month of June. He stated that during the summer of 1971, he was absent without leave from his assigned army post at Fort Dix, New Jersey. He did not remember the specific day that he left the fort, but he said that on the day that he departed, he went to his father's house in Brooklyn, New York, where he stayed for 2 or 2.5 months. Although he said that he worked on an automobile with his brother the day of his return to Chicago, he further stated that he arrived at his mother's home only one day before his brother's arrest. So the sergeant was a guy named Lawrence. He was a military policeman stationed at Fort Sheridan, Illinois, and he substantiated Jose's testimony. So you see how things are kind of going for Gino in his trial. If you guys have any questions about what's going on exactly, you can ask me in the comment section, because this was some very interesting stuff. So his testimony, the sergeant, unobjected to by the defense, was that a personal check of the records of the Absentee and Deserter Information Center of Fort Benjamin, Harrison, Indiana, revealed that Jose Colon was reported absent without leave from Fort Dix on May 28, 1971, and was classified as a deserter 1 month after that date. The defendant, who's Lord Gino, contends that it was plain error, of which the court should take notice, for the trial court to admit into evidence the officer's testimony. He asserts that the testimony was hearsay, that it violated the best evidence rule, and that it was completely destroyed his alibi. So they said the court said we cannot accept the defendant's estimate of the importance of this testimony. They said first, despite the number of witnesses who supported it, the story about the celebration to honor the return of the fugitive seemed contrived. So they're saying that whole thing about him being at the party to celebrate his brother's thing it seemed like it was cooked up. They said the testimony contained contradictions concerning the date of the party, the number of persons present, and the hour at which the defendant ceased working on Jimenez's car. They said, more important, the alibi was destroyed by the testimony of the defendant's own brother. So Gino's brother, his testimony, okay, in this, the court was saying that his brother's testimony contradicted what Gino was saying about it. They said the statements made by the officer were only cumulative and corroborative of Jose Colon's earlier testimony to the effect that he had not been in Chicago on the date of the gathering supposedly held to honor him. So Jose was saying that he wasn't there. And they're saying that, the cops' testimony, Gino was saying the cops' testimony was just hearsay and therefore it shouldn't have been admitted in court. But they're saying, look, the cops' testimony was agreeing with the testimony that his brother was saying that he wasn't there. So it wouldn't matter if the cops' testimony was hearsay or not. So anyways, while they did not definitely state the date that he came to Chicago, he did say that he went to Fort Dix to Brooklyn to stay there for at least 2 months, and that he was there on July 4th, 7 days after the defendant and his witnesses testified they celebrated his return home. So he was still gone when they were saying that he had returned home. He also stated that he did not see his mother and brother until the day before Gustavo's arrest, which was fixed by other witnesses at a date in late August 1971. So he was gone. Gino was saying that he was at a party to celebrate his brother coming back from the army, and the brother wasn't there. So the purported guest of honor at the party, intended to establish the defendant's alibi, had impeached the alibi's witness before the cop had even uttered a word of testimony. So it didn't matter. So Gino's whole defense was weak, man. It was more than a long shot. It was like a no shot. It was like there was no chance that this was going to work. So 4 witnesses, at least 2 of whom knew the defendant by sight or nickname, viewed the shooting at close range and were positive in their identification of him as the murderer. Now, here's something else he was trying to use to beat this. Okay, the defendant's appellate counsel, and the defendant is, guys, let's just remind you, when I say defendant, that's Gino. His lawyer suggested that the trial court meted out an unduly harsh punishment because it permitted itself, and this is very interesting right here, man, because it permitted itself to be influenced by his gang affiliation. He argues that if the evidence is studied carefully, it will show a racial rather than a gang motivation for the shooting. Okay, so check this out, bro. Gino's lawyer was trying to say in his appeal to try to get him off that him killing Glenn Burr wasn't gang related, it was racially motivated. He's saying this to try to get him off. He's saying this to try to beat the case. He's saying, no, he didn't shoot him because he was a gang member. He shot him because he was black. This is Gino's lawyer, not the other lawyer. This is Gino's lawyer trying to defend him, saying he shot this guy in a racially motivated hit. And he's saying that to try to beat the case. So how about that? That's crazy, man. And, I mean, the truth, guys, who knows? I mean, I've heard a lot of stuff on the internet about the real reason why, he was killed, but a lot of this is like self-contradictory explanation. He said the defendant's attorney then attempted to convince the court that the defendant became a member of the Latin Kings through intimidation. And they said that the record does not support the interpretation of the court's reasoning. This is according to his lawyer. At the pre-sentencing hearing, the prosecutor mentioned that gang activity should be stamped out. So the court commented that the defendant was not on trial for being a gang member and added words to the effect that in any event, arrest is no excuse for murder. So they said it doesn't matter if the Kings were trying to press Gino into joining, that doesn't matter. Like that's still not an excuse for murder. The evidence of the trial has shown that far from displaying any reluctance or visible effects of intimidation, the defendant fairly reveled in the execution of his victim. So they're saying Gino was not acting like he was scared and like he was being pressed into doing this. He was acting like he was down with it. He was going up, smiling, while he's pulling the trigger, trying to kill the girl, And Gino was one of the main guys in the Kings. So it's not like, these Kings are pressing him. That whole thing was far-fetched. I mean, these defenses were like all super far-fetched. So the evidence, they said at the trial, had shown that far from displaying any reluctance, he had looked like he was happy to do it. He fired repeatedly, they said, into the body of Glenn Burr, and then casually held a gun to the head of the woman, who was spared only because the killer's earlier zeal had emptied the weapon. So they're saying he was out of bullets, and if he hadn't been out of bullets, she might be dead too. So no court, they said, would reasonably consider personal racial hatred, which appellate counsel tenders as a substitute for the purported gang motivation, as a mitigating circumstance. So the court is basically telling Gino's lawyer, are you kidding us? You're saying that we should let him off because it wasn't gang related, it was racially motivated? They're like, that could be even worse. Like, how are you trying to get him off by using that? See, this is crazy, man. You know what I'm saying? Like, this is one of the weirdest cases that I've ever read. And it's the only time that I've ever heard a lawyer. Well, I shouldn't say the only time. There's been other times, but it's one of the most stark examples, and with one of the most famous defendants, that I've ever heard a lawyer try to get a guy off by saying that the real reason was even worse than the reason that the court was talking about. Now, the Kings, this is a whole side tangent that I could go off on, is kind of, see, the Kings, like, it's Puerto Ricans. It was like a lot of Puerto Rican members, a lot of Mexican members. I would say those are the two predominant, like, ethnic groups in the Latin Kings. And Puerto Ricans, as you guys know, are a mix of different races. The average DNA, I think, across the island is like 64% European. I don't know those percentages exactly, but it varies from person to person. Like, the percentages are all over the place. You got some Puerto Ricans that are mostly black. You got some Puerto Ricans that are mostly white. I don't really know of too many Puerto Ricans that are like 100% native. I don't think that really exists. Most are like a mix of white, European, and some are mixed with black. So you've got Puerto Ricans that really in the United States would be classified as white, some that would be classified as black. But interestingly, guys, the one drop rule, and this was like still pretty much in force at the time of this murder in the early 70s, the one drop rule did not really apply to demographics that had a distinct culture from African Americans. And this is a topic for a whole other video that I could go into that plays kind of into the racial dynamics of this. But if a person was like, okay, let's say Black American, right? Let's say he was like a quarter black. Okay, he has like a black grandparent. The rest of his DNA is white American. He would be considered black at this time. Okay, like he's just a quarter black. He would be considered black. But a Hispanic guy, Okay, a guy who's like Afro-Latino, let's say from the Dominican Republic or Puerto Rico, who's like 75% black, would at this, and this is really weird, would like not be considered black. He'd be put in the Hispanic category. Like, even though Hispanic is not really a genetic racial category, it's a cultural language group. In the US, and this is what this is what sociologists say about race being a construction. They make that like a racial category, even though it's not really a physical genetic categorization. So, like, you'd have a black Latino guy who would be considered Latino, not black, and then you'd have like a barely black American guy, and he'd be considered black. It's weird, man, and it's constantly changed. Like, this is like a whole college course could be taught on this. But in one time, the racial taxonomists in Western Europe didn't even consider Ethiopians and East Africans to be black. They put them in the Caucasian category. They're partly mixed with Caucasian, but I'd say majority of their DNA, at least more than 50% of it, is black, and they were stuck in the Caucasian category. So, and but then again, an American black guy who's like 12% black is considered black. That just shows you how crazy the whole thing was. You know what I'm saying? So the Latin Kings, they had members that, I mean, technically had a lot of black DNA, but these guys were not socially considered black. That was considered like a separate culture, a separate ethnic group, a separate team. Now, today, the Latin Kings on the east side, they have some black members. And I would say that they have some black members throughout the city too, but the Kings is one of those gangs, though, that's known for like, chasing black guys off of the mere suspicion that they're a GD. You know what I'm saying? Like, especially up north, guys come up north, they get chased, and the Kings will be like GDK, and this will just be some random black innocent neutron that's not on anything. You know what I'm saying? Like, this happens quite a bit with them, and a lot of the black guys have a grievance with the fact that Cook County Jail is down there by the Kings neighborhood, down by 26 in California, and that they got to walk, through their turf, like back to the blue line or back to the bus stop or whatever. And they say that it's like nerve wracking for them to do that. There's kind of like a history of this with them. But I wouldn't say that it's overall a racist gang. Most of the Latin Kings that I know, they're not racist. But again, because of their like just ideological beef with the GDs, which goes all the way back in the day, they a lot of times end up like getting on that with like innocent black guys. The court concluded that there was no evidence that the court abused its discretion and the sentence would not be disturbed. Okay, so they said the charges pertaining to the ineffective assistance of the defense's trial counsel parallel the points raised in this appeal. So they also had discussed potential mistakes that were made by the lawyer. So anyways, all of Gino's attempts to beat the case with these defenses failed. And whose idea it was to use the racial thing to try to say it wasn't gang related, it was racially motivated. Whether that was his idea or the lawyer's idea, I don't know, but that was like a suicide mission, man. Any information you guys have to add on this case, you guys can let me know in the comment section, man. But this was a very interesting case, and Gino is still sitting in there to this day. This your boy, Chicago News. I'm out.